A young man sits alone, needing a change in his life. He goes online, goes into YouTube, types in motivation. What comes up? Compilation videos of famous speakers trying to become famous, people with tried and true methods, or people with popular soundbites. They watch this video with a backdrop of riveting symphonies. Inception springs to mind, Interstellar, other various famous orchestral compositions. And after watching these 10-minute videos, they feel uplifted. They feel a change within themselves. Sounds good, right? Like a good thing in life. But what if the answer to motivation isn't to get the heart racing, isn't to get excited, but truthfully is to be okay with silence and with the mundane? Motivation today is not what it used to be 10, 20, 30 years ago. And just like all content online that's become oversaturated, a negative connotation, a negative mask, the symbol of motivation has become perverted or not what it used to be. So, where is the way forward, and what is the correct way or the best way to motivate others and yourself? This is Oversaturated, Entitled Garbage, and our topic today is motivational videos and also speakers and influencers. So this is a topic that for me, I wouldn't say it's personal, but I am definitely, I think, probably in the upper percentages of people who have consumed this kind of content. And, it has definitely helped me. I remember 15 years ago, when I was a teenager, or not quite a teenager, actually. A teenager. Even earlier, I think, even 20 years ago, let's go back, maybe 15, 20 years. There was like a popular video by a guy named Eric Thomas. And anyone who probably played sport, and I think more people than that would know this video and this particular recording. And it's kind of what made Eric Thomas blow up. So Eric Thomas is known as the street preacher. His story was homeless, and basically turned it all around, became one of the most well-known motivational speakers in the entire world. And in this video, he talks about wanting to succeed. And the story goes of a guy who meets a guru and he asks the guru, how can I be successful? Show me how to be successful. So he meets the guru out in the beach, and basically the guru takes him out to the water, takes him deeper and deeper and deeper until he holds him under the water and starts drowning him. Now, up until the very last second, he lets him up and he's gasping for air. And, the guru goes to the man, like, did you feel like how much you wanted to breathe then? And the guy goes, yeah, of course. And the guru says, well, that's what you need to be successful. Until you want to succeed as bad as you want to breathe, you will never be successful. And that blew up, right? Because what a soundbite, what a story. And that was, to be honest, that was one of the first kind of motivational speeches that I heard that drew me in. And it was a very inspiring montage, let's say. Not necessarily a montage, but a short kind of anecdote to help someone perceptualize and conceptualize what it takes to be supposedly successful. And now this is obviously in the context of kind of entrepreneurship, or maybe it's in the context of working. It's definitely not necessarily in the context of, say, building a family and these kinds of things. And one could argue that, sure it is, but in reality it comes from, wanting to be more than average. And I think that's the all success content and motivational content comes from this desire to be greater than average. And I think overwhelmingly it is absolutely targeted at men. So I think men respond more than women to that kind of really in your face kind of content. I think in general, men kind of respond to those kind of pushes a bit more than what women do. And that's an example, as I said, as one of the most famous ones that is out there. And one that kind of did the rounds and was kind of a popular one to reference. And that kind of led me on this journey. And over, my years, I definitely had my fair share of peaks and troughs in motivation and trying to figure out like what to do with life and relationships and all these other things, right? That can be just really quite difficult in navigating when you don't have much direction, let's say. So in those times, I drew a lot of inspiration from those kinds of videos. And one of the probably the most famous speaker today is Anthony Robbins, and he might technically be past his peak, but Anthony Robbins, he's been around for decades now, and he's worth billions of dollars. He's established an empire of motivation. Now, Anthony Robbins for sure has his sound bites, but his entire method isn't just sound bites, and neither is Eric Thomas. However, I think Anthony Robbins didn't necessarily get famous for sound bites. He got famous for I think Personal Power 2, which is like these older kind of CD/tapes that he put out. I think that really kind of pushed him into the spotlight, and I think him working with prominent figures as well also helped increase his his star power and notoriety, for lack of a better term, within popular culture. And something to do with Anthony Robbins, like some of the things that he was professing or wanting to get people to take on, he was at the time kind of mocked by the psychology community. And then many years later, the things that he was talking about were actually adopted by the psychology community and mental health community. So in a lot of ways, Anthony Robbins, he was ahead of his time, but he is definitely another example of someone who is a pioneer and really led the way to probably people like Eric Thomas, becoming famous. Another guy who I've listened to a lot. His name's Les Brown. Les Brown was a radio host, I believe, and then over the years established himself as a motivational speaker. Now, Les Brown is another one of these guys who is an extremely good speaker, and he is very, very good with telling stories, even poetry. So he has some really, really kind of uplifting speeches that he does on stage, and these are often included in those kind of success montages. And I think over time, what's kind of happened with motivational speakers is that the success montages kind of almost become bigger than the actual speaker themselves. And I think it's an indicative kind of reality of where we're at in a lot of ways. And I think it's worth discussing because when we think about, say, a guy like Anthony Robbins, whose content was based on a lot of studying and reading that he did, like this guy dedicated himself wholeheartedly and in a way where you couldn't deny the effort that he put in, not only just in practicing, but also in what he learned. But we fast forward to 2025, and the kind of motivational content that's out there via modern people, and a lot of it is definitely based on material wealth. Now, everyone has seen, the young guys out there, mostly guys, they've got this big collection of cars, and they kind of, it's obviously clickbait content where they're saying, oh, should I drive this car? Or should I drive this car? And so, I drive the McLaren today, or whatever it is. And then they've got these big mansions, and often they I would say embody a pretty typical or cliche kind of archetype of a person. And the reputation among, I guess, regular folk is that these guys are most likely scam artists doing Ponzi schemes, selling courses, etc., etc. And for the most part, they'd be right. I've seen my fair share of that kind of stuff, and a lot of it's, let's say, it's ecom lessons or tutorials on how to sell an ecom, and they talk about how much money they've generated with their businesses, and now they're selling these things for free. And obviously, there's all kind of hooks they need to get people in, and it's I guess to call it a scam, like many of them sure probably are pretty shady, but it's not necessarily a scam to show someone how to develop an business. But the thing is with a lot of ecom businesses is you really only get what you put in. So if you want to sell a bunch, you want to sell $10,000 worth of goods, a lot of the time you've kind of got to put in $10,000 worth of ads, or whatever it is. So like it's easy to kind of generate sales when you're doing like a 1-to-1 expenditure to conversion ratio. And that's what a lot of this kind of stuff is. So when they talk about, $10 million in revenue, they're not necessarily discussing like how much ad spend went into creating that revenue, because a lot of the time what you will find is it gets pretty close. Like someone might spend like $9.9 million and get $10 million of revenue, make 100K, which really isn't the best return. But they can claim the 10 million revenue. And those are the stats that they put in there, right? So, and this is the kind of the things they don't really say up front, is that at the end of the day, you're not going to generate all this money out of nowhere. Like you've got to put up money to these ads, and you will likely get a 1-to-1 return. Maybe you make a little bit of a loss at first, and then eventually over time, depending on the product and depending, I guess, luck and how much money you put in, eventually you'll start getting a positive net out of it. But it's not these kind of crazy gains that a lot of people are selling. And I guess I've always kind of asked the question when I see that content. I said, if I made all this money doing ecom, would I even waste my time creating these ads to try and convince people to join, right? Because if I'm making so much money, the money must be so incredible. Why would I even bother to sell a course? And I think that's where a lot of these kinds of things fall apart, where it's very clear that the money these guys are making, are backstopped by the courses that they're selling, right? They might get a piece of something or whatever it is. I haven't actually signed up to one to go far enough, but I think it's pretty clear, like those are the kind of models that they're working on. And there's these guys that, let's say, they've got investment properties as well, and they make that crossover to being social media personalities, and they'll go on podcasts, whether they're setting up the podcast. Like I think what's kind of very more common now is these podcast spaces that people hire, so people can rent it out for whatever, how many hours, and then it's all awesome setup, all awesome lighting, everything looks perfect, and they're able to kind of I guess present something that may not be something that they've spent a lot of time on, right? So I think when someone, wants to seem like they're an expert on something, if you've got production value to your videos and your pictures and all this kind of stuff, then it's more convincing. Now, it can go the other way. For me, it definitely does. I think I can kind of spot a rented podcast studio when I see one. And that doesn't necessarily mean the person doesn't have something worthwhile to say. What it does mean, though, is they're kind of planning to make this podcast, as opposed to someone who, I don't know, I guess like it's kind of like a two-way street. Like the person who's hosting is renting out the spot and they have this person on. I just think it's kind of more of a rendezvous or a meeting, as opposed to someone who's dedicating time and has their own space. I think it does show a different kind of style and vibe. And I think the most popular podcasts are out there are people who had their own space. They're not renting spaces, right? You might rent a space for a business purpose, but without getting too sidetracked, you'll see these guys and they'll have these really confident things to say about what it takes to be successful. Like a one that I've seen relatively recently was talking about how cooking is a waste of time, going to the shops and doing XYZ. Getting Uber Eats is in reality a more economical choice because the amount of time it takes to cook, how valuable is your time? There's also an Australian Instagram called Equity Mates, and they have a thing like every Friday they bring out kind of finance content to that kind of, it's bad advice, and so a lot of that is a lot of that stuff is definitely going to showcase those kinds of guys. But I think to myself, when I was, young teenager and I was exposed to Eric Thomas's video, if I was exposed to one of these other guys instead, and whether that would kind of change my trajectory or change not necessarily my values, but I guess my perception on what success is and what it really takes, right? So I think what the modern kind of motivational content is heavily linked to finance and e-com and money, obviously. And I don't think it's less about trying to develop good habits and good routines, and more about how to make money. Now, obviously, to most people, well, it makes sense. Like, you want to make money with as little time as possible, and so everyone's looking for this kind of way out, or these secret kind of pathways that going to make you into a millionaire, or someone's earning six figures overnight. Me personally, I've got friends that hit the big time when it came to crypto. They jumped on at the right time, and they held on when a lot of people jumped off, and they're much better for it. But again, these people are outliers, and while there's many people that have had success in crypto, the people that you see online that claim these kind of $1 million profits, and they want to bring people into those kind of investment ideas, often they're unicorns, right? They're less than 1%, and they've hit a jackpot, and they're trying to keep the gravy train going by leveraging that success. So thinking about what modern success content is and how it can affect others, and also how oversaturated it is, right? So every guy who's made a bit of money in whatever it is, investing or crypto, or even e-com, if they can potentially self-establish themselves as experts, and that doesn't necessarily make them experts, and it surely doesn't make them experts in how to be successful. And the truth is that they're creating a shallow, dumbed down version of what being an entrepreneur is. So in my personal opinion, I think being an entrepreneur, I think calling yourself an entrepreneur, or just the word entrepreneur in general, I think has a bit of a, how do you say, like a bit of a, not necessarily frat boy connotation now, but it's kind of like a douchey kind of thing. Like I myself, I've got businesses that I've started, and I would definitely fit the definition of someone who is an entrepreneur. However, I never ever refer to myself as an entrepreneur, because I think the word has been kind of oversaturated to the point where people make assumptions about what you're actually doing. So if I'm talking to someone who in a serious discussion, and I want them to take me seriously, whether it's for a professional relationship or a personal relationship, for me to say, I'm an entrepreneur, I think it's not something, it's not somewhere I go to. I'd rather say, I run a few businesses, and et cetera, et cetera. I think the entrepreneur title has been hijacked, and it no longer carries what it once originally meant, which was someone who was self-employed and someone who is taking on ventures themselves, right? And exploring kind of, or taking risks, I suppose, and starting their own companies and businesses, whether it's products, services, and also divesting or having a breadth, right? So I think someone who kind of has one business, that doesn't necessarily make them an entrepreneur, but I think an entrepreneur is someone who potentially has multiple aspects to their business, and that makes them an entrepreneur. But again, everybody wants to be able to, a lot of people in that space relish in that title, and that in itself diminished what it actually meant. So for myself, I see a lot of this content, and I think it does kind of evoke not necessarily envy, but this idea that I myself, aren't where I should be. And I think a lot of people probably share those feelings when you see these young guys and you think, how are they affording these cars? How are they affording these homes? And you hear that they're rented, and you hear that they're just doing it for the ad. And I think a lot of that is true. However, I do think a lot of these guys probably have hit the jackpot, and are trying to, yeah, again, keep things going in some way. And it makes me think about like all the content that I've consumed when it comes to motivation, and what is useful and what isn't, and what it actually takes to kind of persevere when you are working towards your own business. And I definitely am not an expert on that topic, right? I'm still somebody who in my professional life is striving to gain more and to be better, and I've made plenty of mistakes. I know I'll continue to make those mistakes. So I think when we call ourselves experts, you either really got to make sure you're an expert, or you're overstating before it's your time, and then you're going to have a bit of a fall, because when you think you know it all, then the thing that you don't know is going to come, and it's going to blindside you. So I'm always I'm a perpetual student when it comes to, I try to be a perpetual student when it comes to all aspects of my life, specifically working and pursuing self-employment goals, I suppose. But I think about what was useful and what wasn't useful. And I think about as well the compilation videos, which I kind of referenced at the start. And I used to watch these videos, and as I said, like, it would get me pumped up, right? It would get me super amped, and they would be great for going for a workout, like listening on the way to a workout. I'd be ready to go work out. But the thing is, when it comes to starting a business, or say trying to, again, achieve above average, or have a side hustle, or whatever you want to call it, a lot of the things that you do, in fact 95% of the things that you do, are really boring. And I think that's what is getting lost in motivational content and success content, and also these guys that are peddling courses and things like this, right? So I think there's two types of, let's say, entrepreneurs, right? And I think one type of entrepreneur wants to be as hands-off as possible, right? They want to generate a business that will have passive income and have as little work as possible. And that is something that I think is absolutely a valid goal. But the second type is people who, I guess, want to continue to work to improve what they do and expand the reach. And eventually, the passive income will come, but they want to create something much greater than just having a bit of a passive income. And I think to get to that passive income, one, you've got to gain knowledge, you've got to gain expertise. And it's absolutely a misnomer or misconception that you can get there without having done the hard yards first. And I think that's where a lot of this current success content and current finance content, well, not necessarily finance content, motivational content, comes from this perspective of skipping the line, right? Skipping the work that one's got to do. And there is such thing as wasted time. Like, just because you work really hard doesn't mean that those things are going to pay dividends. It doesn't mean that, if you put in an 80-hour work week, that 80-hour work week could be focused on the wrong thing. And I've definitely been there. I've focused on a lot of things when it comes to improving services, when it comes to the companies that I work in. And I missed the mark completely, right? An example would be trying to have the most extended hours possible, but the result was less quality in the service providing. So thinking that the people that I was working with wanted to be able to, say, contact after hours, and that was the number one importance, when in reality, the number one importance was quality service on the other end. And missing that, it was of detriment to what I was actually trying to create. So that's an example of saying, hard work can be wasteful. Just because someone works hard doesn't mean that they're going to be successful. And when we talk about success content, a lot of it is about working hard. Especially with Eric Thomas, he definitely goes into working hard, and Les Brown and even Tony Robbins. But one thing they also go into is educating yourself, right? So if we talk about the modern content, it has nothing to do with educating oneself. It has everything to do with quick, snappy ways of making money that aren't realistic for the majority of people. And when we think about the motivational videos, which I've referred to, and what I've said earlier is that 95% of what one does when you work for yourself and you're building a company is really, really like tedious, boring work. And it sucks. Like I've been there, and like it's hard, right? Because it's the times when no one expects you to do anything. And you could easily just kind of unwind, watch TV, and just not worry about it. But at the end of the day, when you're working for yourself, you only get what you put in, and you have to hold yourself accountable. And a lot of the things that you got to hold yourself accountable for are the things that most people don't want to do. So when I'm watching, or when anyone's watching these videos that are about getting motivated, and it's kind of soundbite after soundbite after soundbite that sounds really good and is really inspirational, and you get really, really excited, it's kind of a juxtaposition, because you go from being super, super amped to having to sit down at a computer and go through expenses and categorize them correctly, or sit down and do invoices, or sit down and do market research and research into the other kind of products that it might rival yours, or other services that are in the area, and what are those websites portraying that yours isn't? What are you doing better than others? Or not necessarily even about competition, but going into, well, what kind of service do you want to provide? What is the mentality or the ideology that is driving what your goals are? And those kinds of things, they're not well matched with being super, super amped. They're matched with being calm. They're matched with being understanding that the result of the work that you do today isn't likely to be seen for the next 6, 12, or even 2 years, or 6, 12 months, or 2 years. Like, it can take that long to see the dividends of that really, really mundane, boring work. And I see a timeline when it comes to motivational content. I see in the 90s where Tony Robbins kind of bursts onto the scene, and he popularizes motivational content, self-help books, self-help tapes, and he blows up bigger than any other speaker there is. And over that point, you've got people, say in my generation, who were kids at this time, and as they grow up, they see the people who were young enough but old enough to take what, say, Tony Robbins was talking about, or Les Brown was talking about, and develop it into something more. And I think Eric Thomas kind of fits that next generation. So he came in at a time that was kind of after Tony Robbins had been well established, and he comes in this next generation. But who comes in next? And the people who come in next are these guys who talk about why cooking food at home is a waste of time, and why just general kind of things that don't actually precipitate or precede any kind of success whatsoever. Like the habits that will make someone go far is resilience, and the ability to sit for long periods, and again, stay focused and consistently do the boring work. Because if you're trying to be an entrepreneur, or if you're trying to be a business person, it doesn't necessarily matter if you can do 2-3 good days out of a week and then you drop off for 10 days. Like, you need to be able to do a solid 4 days of real work every week, and you will get somewhere if you're able to do that. Now, a lot of this content out there, say Eric Thomas, he talks about getting up early. That's a big one. Getting up early. I get up at 4 a.m. And I saw a comedian recently who talked about, it's like these guys who get up at 4 a.m., they're going to bed at like 7 or 8. So it's like at the end of the day, they're getting just as much sleep and wakeful time as everyone else. They're just shifting it. But the point is that in the morning, and when you've just woken up, you're generally more productive, you have more energy. So I guess structuring your day so you do the most difficult things at the start and you wind down by the time it gets to nighttime is generally the best practice, because I know I haven't really benefited much when I've stayed up till midnight trying to work on something. I know that every time I do that, I say to myself, it would have been better for me to just go to bed earlier and then wake up earlier and then do the work. In school, I was someone who always did all-nighters, and that definitely came back to bite me in university when cramming doesn't work for learning, business stats and things like this, right? So when I think of the say the content around getting up early and these kinds of things, and not going to sleep, one of the clips that Eric Thomas has, he talks about how Beyonce was on a set, and she was so into what she was doing that she forgot to eat. And he talks about saying, when you're almost done, like, don't go to sleep. It's like, don't cry to quit, cry to keep going. And that's when I think people would reference this kind of stuff as toxic hustle culture, right? Hustle culture being toxic, and this kind of stuff is like around hustle culture, and it is definitely something that should be monitored by someone if they start feeling guilty about having to go to sleep or taking time for lunch. I think there is extremes, and I think when I listen to someone like Eric Thomas, who again, like, I think is a very intelligent guy, has his value, absolutely. But when I think about Eric Thomas talking about these things, I think the point he is trying to make is that consistency is going to get you to where you need to go, and not giving up so easily. I think the content is meant to be taken with a grain of salt, but I also think it's absolutely valid to say, hey, like, if you're talking to somebody who doesn't fully understand that you're using metaphors and you're using conceptual ideas to get your point across, and they take this quite literally, it's not going to be good for them, and they sure as heck are not going to become successful by getting lack of sleep and doing 50% of their efficiency work rate 6 days a week. For me personally, I've found that if I hit a solid 4 days of real productive work, then I know that I'm on the right track. The points where I falter is when I'm not honest about the work I'm doing, and I think I'm sitting there for 5-6 days, but in reality, I'm not doing productive work, and the best thing I can do is step away, do something that's going to help me reset, and then come back to it. And that's a lesson that I've learned. Not to say that I'm an expert, but for me, it's being honest with how productive is the work I'm doing, and am I focusing on the right tasks, zooming out and not fixating on micro details that I care about more than anyone else. So where does that leave the so-called young people that I'm talking about, the people who were my age listening to Eric Thomas, who are my age listening to these get rich quick guys, and these guys who go on podcasts and portray the vision of success and the vision of the entrepreneur who can say no wrong, who knows the answer, who knows the way, who can cut through the fat and give you the gold that of what it takes, to become successful in business. And I'm definitely grateful to that Eric Thomas was my guy for that, and Les Brown, even though he was a few not to say a generation, but a few years before Eric Thomas, I'm definitely grateful that was what was popular. Because if I look at what's popular now in the form of reels on Instagram, then again, you're not seeing any content about the material of say success and what it really is and what it really means. You're seeing a facade of success. You're saying, hey, do you want to own all these nice things? Well, buy my book and you can find out how. And there's even guys that market to say, if you want to build a profile, you make a book, and it doesn't really matter what it's for. That's secondary. It's just having a book, and you use the book to generate sales. Like, this is a very tried and true tactic. So it's very calculated and manipulative, and it's based around a facade, not the roots of what it takes to be successful. And to most people, it seems quite obvious. And my observation when I see this content, again, like I'm watching out of, I've mentioned before for other topics, morbid curiosity. And in a way, I am contributing. Like, as I've said in another episode, that it absolutely matters when we watch these things, because views are the currency. The more eyeballs they get on it, the more likely they are to be able to generate some kind of income from it. And the people that are targets aren't necessarily just young people. It's also older people who are probably desperate and maybe, lacking something, a certain spice of life, and they're trying to maybe change career paths or get some extra money. They really need the money. They're looking for an answer, and these people come out of the ether and they say, "Hey, I've got the answer." So it is something that is obviously concerning and will continue to be there. And so I think, are the people who are likely to fall for that kind of stuff, the people that are going to hypothetically listen to this podcast, and then, they're going to be, their mind's going to change, and all of a sudden they're going to make the right decision? Probably not. But the point of this podcast isn't necessarily to try and change people's minds. It's obviously to get discussions happening and to put a spotlight on things that people overlook and have become cliche and oversaturated. And I think the motivational content, success content is a very, very oversaturated space. I know I've mentioned fitness content being the most oversaturated. I think this kind of space is probably a close second, unless I think of something else. But I think, those two really, when we think about kind of trash content that's out there, this is, runs rampant with it. And so the fact that it's out there, and the fact that these guys are out there, it means that there is obviously some success to be had. There's obviously some people that are buying into this, and it's easy to kind of overlook and say, who's gonna fall for this? People are. So my goal is to communicate this as in opposition, in hopes that this will potentially start an adverse reaction to those kinds of things. And without being too preachy, and without kind of expressing me as an expert, I just know that when I was trying to make real changes in my life, that listening to sound bites, at the end of the day, they helped me get out of bed, but they didn't help me do the work, and they didn't help me be consistent, because motivation isn't a feeling, because feelings are fleeting. And the concept of motivation, again, has been made to be almost a toxic kind of word, where it's like, oh, I'm into motivational content, or I'm a motivational speaker, because anyone can really label themselves without having the credentials. Again, it muddies the waters as to what is the real way, or what is one of the correct ways, or the better ways to do things. And simply put, is that if you're unable to sit down for long periods doing things that don't necessarily interest you, but all in the name of getting to where you want to go, if you can't do that, then unfortunately, it's very, very likely that being an entrepreneur and having your own business and doing these things isn't going to go your way. Because until you can sit down when it's just you and no one else is watching, and do the work that needs to be done in order to get to where you need to go, until you can do that, like, it's just not going to happen. And I know I'm not speaking to everyone here who's got their own jobs, and this could relate to, say, even fitness, right? So like fitness, if you're trying to get in shape, until you're honest with yourself about being strict in the areas that you need to be, where no one else is going to be coming to kind of give you, the stick and say, hey, don't do that, or don't eat this, or hey, you didn't go to the gym as much times as you said you were going to. Like, until you can kind of conquer those little battles consistently, you're always going to kind of fall back where you once were. And I can say this from experience, and I continue to have these battles, as we all do. And again, like, I'm not here to speak as if I've got everything figured out, but what I have got figured out is that listening to 5-minute compilation videos with motivational sound bites is good to get to the gym. It's good to get me out of bed in the morning. It's good to say self-affirmations when I'm feeling fatigued, but it's the knowledge that only me, or only myself, can bring forth what it is that I want in my life. An affirmation that I like to say is, I am the source of all abundance. And this is something that I heard. And again, it might seem a bit wishy-washy, but to me, it is one of these key kind of sentences that reinforces that anything that's worthwhile in my life is going to come from my effort, and there's no way around it. So if you think these guys who have these nice cars and these nice houses are going to be able to sell you this 20-page book and that's going to have the answer to everything that they have and that's it, it's not true. The people who are most successful in e-commerce have probably tried a number of different products, and they've probably dedicated a lot of their time and resources into finding the right one, and also taken a lot of risk there. And you obviously hear about the people that are successful, but the people that are successful are in the minority. Most small businesses fail within 2 years. You don't necessarily hear about those. You hear about the success stories, and when people are successful and they want to keep things going, and they know that if they're able to continue to portray someone that is successful, that is going to then in turn elongate their success. Then it's a recipe for people to get taken advantage of, and also for people to live in a state of wanting and envy and of emptiness, right? And when we think about, this person has more than me, and I wish that I could do this. What's stopping me from doing this? It's a deficit mindset, and that's not where motivational start. That's not where motivation comes from. One thing I'll always respect Anthony Robbins for is because his stuff is rooted in so much theory, where if you were to actually sit and do his personal power tapes, whether it's 1 or 2, 100% you're going to get benefit from it. But the thing is that I guarantee, even if you had the tapes, even if they were given to you for free, you wouldn't sit down and do the 10 weeks. And I say the general you, I don't mean to, speak directly to a particular person. I'm just saying most people wouldn't even get to the end, even though it has clear benefit. And there's so many examples like that where it's really, really easy to make a positive change in your life and expand where you want to. It just takes that consistent effort. But that consistent effort is tedious, and it's boring, and it's easier to watch TV. It's easier to scroll on our phones. It's easier to go out on Friday night than stay home and read on the topic that is going to help you start that business or help you get further in your job that you're working, or whether it is trying to better your personal relationships, trying to understand yourself more. It takes effort that most people aren't willing to give. And it's definitely more than just a 5-minute soundbite and in a YouTube compilation video. And it's definitely more than these so-called gurus that are online trying to sell you something as if they have the answer. And I think there's a reason why a lot of these guys live overseas in Bali and other places, because one, they're trying to make their money go a long way. They have achieved a remote lifestyle, but they're also trying to, again, portray the image that they need to suck people in. So I think in summation of the episode, and the question I kind of want to leave people with is, if there is something that you want in your life, whether it's to be more successful or to achieve something, what do you think is, for you, the best way of going about it? And if you are consuming this kind of finance kind of based content, is it only sound bites that you're listening to, or how deep do you go into it? Because for me, it is hard to read long form content. If the majority of the stuff I'm watching is short form, it's harder to convert and go into that longer form. So I know the answer for me is to consume less of those sound bites, consume less of the YouTube compilation stuff, and actually pick up a book that's going to go into the nitty gritty details of those kinds of things, and read those boring articles. And that's really what it's about. I think being honest with ourselves about what is most effective for us, and also the bad habits that we fall into when it's comforting, right? I know I have bad habits that are like comfort to me. And it's a way to reward myself when I'm kind of starved of that feeling, right? That gratification. And that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about delayed gratification. And that's a oversaturated term in a way as well, because it's easy to say and but hard to feel. And it's really hard to feel delayed gratification. I think an easy way is when we're dieting, or not to say dieting, but working out towards a goal and we achieve that goal. That's delayed gratification. But in employment sense, for your job, if you've got a business, that delayed gratification might not come for a long, long time. So when you're in between those feelings, and you're feeling kind of down, or you're feeling just kind of mid, right? What is a way of staying the course? And I will say, those videos, sometimes they are the way. Sometimes they are a nice little reminder to say, okay, that's why I'm doing this, because I want to achieve this, and it's important for me to stay the course. That's where those videos come into play. But it doesn't necessarily help someone be consistent. It might help you not cross a line, or it might help you pick you back up out of the mud when you need to be picked up out of the mud. But when we talk about consistency, that's going to come from excellence, and that's going to come from being realistic about what we're doing with our time. So again, coming back, leaving with the episode, I hope that there's some stuff there to make you think about the things that you might watch, what motivates you, how important is motivation to your life, and do you think that the content that you're consuming that does motivate you isn't really motivating you? Is it going to help you go consistently, or is it just something that makes you feel good in the time and will fade once you've kind of forgotten about that video? So I think it's an interesting concept. It's something that I think about all the time, and I've definitely made changes in what I'm watching day to day that helps me stay the course. And in future episodes, we might put a spotlight on the biggest culprits that are propagating these kinds of things, and probably doing more damage to society than actually helping people. But I think for the first few episodes, it's definitely about talking about not necessarily the concepts, but the sphere of these things as a whole, before zoning in on the particulars. I hope you've got some value from today's episode. You've been listening to Oversaturated, Entitled Garbage, and I'll speak to you next week.